Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back to my prayer closet. I realize it has been a very long time. It's been 2 weeks since I have actually done a recording or had a message or anything for you guys, but I have been extremely busy. Life has been lifing, and I have kind of had to put all of the extra ministry on the back burner as I minister for my family. So, that's the most important ministry that the Lord gives you, I believe, is your family, and you have to be there for them. If you're not going to take care of your family, if you're not going to be there for the ones that God has entrusted you with and blessed you with, then how are you supposed to be there for the ones that you don't even know, the ones that are strangers to you, and the public ministry? So I've been doing private ministry and being there for my family and just taking care of life situations and things. And we're not out of the woods yet completely, but I am to a point right now where I can get on here and make a podcast. This is actually a message that I am going to preach, which this is pre-recorded, so I will have already preached it at my church by the time I actually post this. But this is a message that the Lord gave me on Sunday. As I was just sitting there typing my thoughts, he gave me a whole message, and I believe that it applies to my life right now, and I know that it's going to apply to so many other people's life. So I do want to get on here and share it, and I was going to just video or record me preaching this at church and post it, but I don't know, something just told me to just get on here and do this. So here I am, and if you don't go to my church and you won't hear me do it live, then here's your opportunity to hear this message that the Lord has given me. Y'all know I'm nobody special. I'm literally just a willing vessel who feels like she has been beat up one way and down the other by the enemy the past few weeks. But here I am still standing. Here I am still praising the Lord, and here I am still doing his work for him. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into the message. Now, there's a lot of reading here. There's a lot of scripture that I have, but that's what we're here for. We're here for the word of God. We're not here for my words. So we're going to walk through Daniel chapter 3 today. And so I'll break it down a little bit as we go, as he has led me to do. So here we go. Daniel chapter 3 verse 1, it says King Nebuchadnezzar, and I'm probably going to call him King Nebi at some point to just make it shorter, but anyway. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide and set it on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So right here, we got to know what's going on. If you're a first-time Bible reader, if you never read this or heard this story or heard the name King Nebuchadnezzar, we got to explain what's going on here. So this actually took place outside of Israel. This took place in a place called Babylon, and this was a place where pagans lived, where people who did not believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived and resided. So this is where Israel, the nation of Israel, were exiled after they had been disobedient to God, after they had worshipped other gods and made idols for themselves, after they had been disobedient time and time and time and time again. God warned them back in the book of Deuteronomy. If you go back and read, he said, if you are obedient, these, and these things are going to happen. If you are disobedient, this, and this is going to happen. And you are going to be exiled to a foreign land where you're going to serve foreign people who serve foreign gods. So this is what happened here. King Nebuchadnezzar, or King Nebi, is the king of Babylon, which is the place that is not Israel, okay? And the Israelites are exiled there. They are living as foreigners in this land, a land of people who do not serve the God that they serve, who do not know the God that they know. Okay, so verse 2 continues and it says, he then summoned the satraps, I don't know, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all other provincial, I don't know, officials. So all these bigwigs, he summoned them all. He summoned all the supervisors, all the officials, all the governors, all the peeps. Okay, he summoned them all to come to the dedication of the image that he had set up. So remember, King Nebuchadnezzar, he made this image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. So this thing is huge. It's a humongous statue, golden statue of King Nebi. So he summoned all these people, all these governors, all these people who are of authority to come and worship this thing. Pretty crazy, huh? It's hard to imagine in a world like we live in today, something like this happening. But this is what happened back then. So these satraps, the prefects, the governors, all the bigwigs assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebi had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." So they're serious about this. They really want all the people to come bow down to this statue of their king. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of all this music playing, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebi set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said, "King Nebi, may the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, all this music, must fall down and worship the king, the idol, the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the burning, blazing fire, the furnace. But there are some Jews who have set over the affairs, so you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebi summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And you got to keep in mind here, these are children. In our day, we would consider these men children. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were probably about 15 years old. Back then, you were allowed to get married at 12. Like, it's very different nowadays. So these kids, they're kids. They're still growing. They're still learning. They're still, developing mentally, physically, in all sorts of ways. So keep that in mind. So Nebi said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I set up?" So you know that these kids are scared to death. These about 15-year-old boys are scared to death. And these boys, they had been exiled from Israel, from their homeland. And they're terrified anyway because they're away from their home. They're away from what they know. They're in a place where people don't worship the God that they serve and that they've known their whole life. These children they were sent to Babylon to be indoctrinated and to serve the king, to work for the king. So King Nebi continues here and he says, "Now," he tells them again, "when you hear all this music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a burning furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "King Nebi, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your Majesty's hand. But if he does not, we want you to know, your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up." So he's kind of challenging them there. He's threatening them. He is trying to intimidate them, and he thinks he's something. He thinks he is more powerful than any other god that ever existed. And he thinks, if you don't worship me, I'm going to throw you in this furnace. And then there's no god ever able to deliver anybody from this furnace. He's thinking, I can do more to you right now than any god could, rescue you from. But he doesn't know the God of Israel. He doesn't know the God that these boys serve is the one true God. He doesn't know that the God that these boys served split the Red Sea open and let them walk across on dry land. He doesn't know that the God that they serve rained bread, manna from heaven to feed them. And he doesn't know that the God that these boys serve brought water out of a rock. He doesn't know the God that these boys serve is able to do exceedingly abundantly more than anything we can ask, think, or imagine. He's the God of the impossible, and he can do all things, right? So King Nebi's about to find out. He's about to mess around and find out. Okay. So when you read this text, when you think of these boys standing in front of the king, I have always envisioned these big, strong, bold-faced teenagers looking at the king and being like, you know what? We're not serving your God. We're not serving you. We're not bowing down to nothing. Our God is able to do anything. But I honestly got to thinking about it. They were probably terrified. They were probably not as bold and brave and just in his face as what we originally would think that they would be. Think about it. Think about it. This is a terrifying situation. They know that the king is serious, and they know that if the king said he's going to throw some people in the furnace, he's going to throw some people in the furnace if they don't do what he says. They're terrified, but they know and they believe in the one true God, and they know that no matter what happens to them here, that they're not going to turn their back on God and what God said. God said that you are not to have any other God before me. You are not to bow down to anything else but me. Like, I am God. I am the one. I'm the one true God. You don't serve any of them. You don't make any idols. You don't do this and that. So they know what is at stake here, and they are terrified in their flesh. They are terrified because they know what's about to happen to them. They know that the king is not going to relent and say, no, they don't have to go in the fire, because they're not backing down and bowing down to him. He's not going back down on what he said would happen, because that makes him look like a weak king. That makes him look like he's a king that will threaten one thing but end up being a pushover in another way. So anyway, these boys are probably scared to death. It's our natural human response in a situation like this that we don't have, we don't know how it's going to end. We don't know how it's going to work out, but it's our natural human response to be terrified, to have our heart pounding, to have our knees weak, to have our palms sweaty, to be scared out of our wits, to be afraid. But you know what? Anybody would be afraid. Anybody in the situation like this will be scared to death. But there's a difference. I want you to listen here. There's a difference between fear and courage. There's a difference between fear. Fear often keeps you from doing what needs to be done. It often keeps you. If they were consumed with fear and driven by fear, they would have bowed down to the idol. They would have bowed down to that thing and worshiped it. If they were fearful, if they had fear consuming them. But they were afraid. And that means when you have courage, you're afraid, but you do it anyway. When you have courage, it means that you are afraid, but you do it anyway. When you are fearful, when there's fear there, fear will keep you from doing what is right. Fear will just help you comply or make you comply when you don't want to, because you're afraid of the outcome or you're fearful of the outcome. But when you have courage, it means that you're afraid, but you do it anyway. I want you to really grasp that. I really want you to grasp that. It's okay to be afraid. I mean, I know the Bible says, do not fear, do not be afraid, and we shouldn't, but it is our natural human response to be afraid. And the difference is, will you let fear stop you in your tracks, or will you be afraid and move onward? Be afraid and keep going and take courage. Courage is when you're afraid, but you do it anyway. Okay, anyway, so fear keeps you from doing what needs to be done, but courage allows you to be afraid, but do it anyway, trusting that no matter the outcome, God is in control. God is still good, and God is still faithful. There's some things that you have to stand up for even if you're standing alone in a land of exile amongst a people who do not know or serve your God, against the people who, worship idols. And even if you're in the face of certain death, like these boys were, you are in the face of burning alive in a fiery furnace. You have to stand up for what is right, and you have to stand up for the Lord and his truth. And even here, you don't conform. These boys didn't conform. They didn't let fear drive them to bow down at the foot of that idol. They didn't conform, but they trusted God and they trusted his will for their life, and whatever happened was going to happen to them, and they accepted that fate. They acknowledged, even here, God is able. God is able to deliver. But if he don't, his will for my life is better. It's better than the ways of the world. It can be his will to walk you straight through that fire. And if it is, then you got to go. You got to go through it. It could be his will to remove the fire completely. And that's wonderful when that happens. It is great when that happens. But if it is his will to send you in that fire, you have to go. Afraid or not afraid. Be courageous and go on through the fire. You've got to go through it. Whether or not you make it through to the other side, you have to trust and believe his plan and his purpose for you is good. Just let that sink in for a moment. Whether or not you make it through the other side of the fire. A lot of times in church and in Christianity, you think, he'll walk you through the fire. There's plenty of worship songs. It's like, he'll walk you through the fire again. Or, you walked me through fires and you pulled me out of the flames. And, that's all great. It is wonderful when you go through the fire and then you make it out on the other side and you're refined and, all the good things that come with going through a trial, that changes you and it molds you to be what God has created you to be. But, you got to trust and believe that even if you're meant to meet your demise in that fire, even if you're meant to go in that fire and not come back out of it, he is still good and he is still able. Back in the book of Judges, think of Samson. He was being used after he was captured at the end there. He was being used by the enemy. I believe it was the Philistines, as like entertainment. And they had this big coliseum where they would, I don't know, do things with them or just make a mockery of them. And he actually used his strength that God gave him and took down 2 pillars that were holding the Colosseum up, and the thing collapsed and it killed more people than he killed in his lifetime, but it also killed him. So he was in the fire and he didn't make it out, but God was glorified. He had killed more in his death than he did in his lifetime. It didn't have a happy ending for Samson. Samson didn't make it out of the fire, but God's will for him was better. Because if you remember anything about Samson, he had a little problem with the women. So if it was God's will to take him right then and there while he was in good standing with him, then that was better for him spiritually. God doesn't care about our comfort more than he cares about our soul. So you may have the worst time ever here on earth. You may not ever have a moment where everything's going right, where everything's good. We're not promised that. We're not promised a good life. But God's concerned about our soul. He's not concerned if you're comfortable. He's concerned about your soul. So sometimes you don't make it out of the fire. Sometimes you don't. He met his demise in the fire, but it glorified God, and it was God's plan, and it was his way, his will, and it was better. Even if we can't see it, even if we don't know how, that could be better, we're not the ones that decide that. God knows all things, and he knows what is best for us, and he loves us. So we just have to trust in him in these moments, and in the fires that we go through, or that we don't even make it out of in our life. So then Nebuchadnezzar, furious. He was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude changed toward them. See, at first he was gracious and he was going to give them another chance to bow down to him. But now that they're refusing and they said all they had to say to him, he said, okay, I'm going to throw you all in the furnace. So he ordered that furnace to be turned up 7 times hotter than it usually was. It didn't need to be that hot, but he just did it for just because he could, pretty much. He was going to make sure that no God could rescue them out of his hand. He commanded some of the strongest soldiers to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into that furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, their trousers, their turbans, and their other clothes, were bound and thrown into the furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so hot that the flames and the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Now, I want you to think here of being bound. It didn't say that their wrists were tied. It did not say that their wrist and their feet was tied, and that was it. The image that is portrayed here, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but it says that they were wearing their robes, their trousers, their turbans, and their other clothes, and they were bound and throwing in there. So it really depicts like tied up like a mummy. Like they are completely restrained and cannot move. They cannot get out of this fire on their own if they even wanted to. They are completely cocooned up and thrown in this thing. That's why they had to be thrown into it. They couldn't walk into it. They couldn't jump into it. Like these soldiers had to wrap them up like a mummy, pretty much, in their trousers, in their turbans, in their clothes, and they were thrown in. They were thrown in. So King Nebi leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." So I want you to notice their posture in the fire. This is important. Their posture in the fire, they're unbound, completely unbound. They went in like mummies. They come out. They're unbound. They're unharmed. You know, fire, when you throw like a piece of clothing in the fire, it's going to burn right up. They were unharmed. And they were walking around. They were walking around. So, you know, there's very much a physical message here. This actually happened. However, there's also a spiritual message for us. You know, they're unbound. The enemy or the king, whoever, bound them up. And like I said, it was not just their hands. It wasn't just, you know, handcuffs. They were completely bound. Kind of like a mummy. They were unable to move on their own. They could not break free themselves. They couldn't help themselves and they couldn't help each other. There was no way out here. No way out for them. But God. God was the only one who was going to be able to set them free from this situation. So not only did they become free from their bondage, they were unharmed, which is a miracle because, you know, the soldiers that threw them in burned up and died as soon as the doors were open. The furnace was 7 times hotter than normal. It should have just completely incinerated them. The spiritual message here, I do want to add that, you know, you can't free yourself. You can't free yourself. There's nothing that you can do about the bondage that the enemy has put around you. You can't free yourself from that. It takes the power of God to set you free from the bondage that the enemy has placed on you. And I'm talking like depression, anxiety. I'm talking about fear. I'm talking about insecurity. I'm talking about jealousy. I'm talking about bitterness. I'm talking about unforgiveness. I'm talking about all the things that we are bogged down with and that we are bound with. The darkness that's around us, the suicidal ideation, the suicidal thoughts and tendencies, and the self-harm and the self-hatred, and like all of those things that the enemy tries to keep us bound with. You cannot set yourself free from that. There's no self-help strong enough to set you free from that. There's no counselor or therapy that is going to be good enough to set you free from the bonds that the enemy has placed on you. But God, in one touch, in one word, can set you free. One encounter with the living God, one prayer with the living God, is enough to set you free from all of that stuff. But you can't do it yourself. He has to do it. He has to do it. And then when you're filled with the Spirit of God and you have the Spirit of God living inside of you, then you can go out and help set others free from their bondage. And if there's something that you are not set free from yet, you can't go set somebody else free from that very thing. So God has to release you, and then you can go help other people. But anyway, I was going to preach this message about, getting through the fire and getting out of the fire, and how you handle your time in the fire matters. And if you just sit there and just sulk in it, or you lay down and you give up, or if you're up walking around in it with your head held high, walking with Jesus and doing all the things. No, that's not the message here. That's what I had planned to do, but no, that's not the message here. That is not the message here. It is not like how you spend your time in the fire. It's not about getting through the fire. It's not about any of that. It's not even about you surviving the fire. It's not about it. That's not what it's about. Or, what even happens in it, or how you handle it, or anything like that. What matters here, what matters is your willingness to trust God and go in it. Even if. This is what matters. I'm going to say it again. It's about your willingness to go in the fire, to trust God, go in the fire. Even if those boys had that type of spirit on them, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they had the spirit of, they knew and trusted in God, and they knew God was able to deliver them from anything that came through at them. But even if he didn't, they trusted him, and they trusted his ways, and they trusted that no matter what, it was God's will for their life, and they were going to be okay. They were not going to bow down to that idol, because they knew that was a fate worse than death. Ooh, that was good. They knew bowing down to that idol would have meant a far greater death in their spirit than dying in that furnace. They were not about to betray God. They were not about to turn their backs on him. Even in the midst of exile, you got to remember where they're at right now. They are in a foreign land, serving a foreign king who serves a foreign God. They thought, the Jewish people, the Israelites thought that God had left them and abandoned them. They thought God forsook them. But not these boys. They knew, even in a foreign land, even in exile, even here, even now, when things are so bad and dark and grim, God is still faithful to his people. And they were not about to turn their back on the one true God who brought their people out of the land of Egypt into a land of milk and honey. Shoo! Anyway, it's okay to be a mess in the fire. It's okay. It's okay. You don't have to be this big, strong person. You don't have to be this big, strong, religious, got your stuff together and you're still, believing and praying and, that's great. But as humans, that's not realistic. It's okay if you're scared to death in the fire. It's okay if you're trembling in the fire. It's okay if your heart's pounding, if your palms are sweaty, if your knees are weak and you're unsure and uncertain and you're terrified and you just want to sit there and cry. It's okay if you don't know how it's going to end. But if you're willing to go in it regardless of the outcome, then you can go in knowing that God has your very best interest at heart, and that He loves you, and that He is for you, and that His way is better. Even if you're scared, even if it is the scariest time in your life and your heart is absolutely pounding out of your chest and you don't know if you can take another step and you feel so weak going in that fire. Just the willingness to go in it. Whew. So getting on the other side of the fire, getting on the other side of it, that's not real life, you know? And as much as we love those stories about how you make it out on the other side and you're bigger and you're stronger and you're greater than you were going in it, and you know, we love those stories and it gives you so much hope and build your faith. I can't preach that message though, just because that's pleasant to hear. I can't preach that message just because that has a happy ending. You know, I'm telling you that there's going to be fires in your life and you may or may not make it out. There could be a bad thing happen to you. People get sick and they don't always get healed. People die. You know, bad things happen to everybody. We live in a fallen world. We live in a fallen world. There's fires left and right. And God is able to get you through any fire that you face. He is able. But that don't mean He's going to choose to bring you out on that other side. Am I making sense? I'm not saying he's not faithful. I'm not saying He's not going to deliver you. I'm saying that you've got to be okay with whether or not He does, because that is His will, His decision. He knows far more than we ever could know. We have to be okay knowing that He's with us no matter how it ends. No matter how it ends. No matter if you get out of that fire or if you do not. Sometimes you're not meant to come out of it. Sometimes it's His will for that fire to take your physical body. You have to be okay either way. He is faithful, even in the midst of exile. Remember, even in the midst of exile, it was a time that they thought that God had left them. They thought they were abandoned. But at the same time, they knew God's still good. God's still with them, and His way is better. So they knew if they perished in that fire, that was God's will for them. They knew. And like I said, it was a far less horrible fate. It was the better option of the two. Serve a different God or die. And they picked to die. They picked to die. Not knowing that God was definitely going to deliver them. They didn't know that. They thought they were going to burn alive, but they would rather burn alive than betray Him, than deny Him, even in the midst of exile. This is a powerful, powerful story in the Bible. So Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, He prayed, Father, take this cup from me. He said, take this cup from me. And whenever I read this, I've read this several times. And one time I read it and I asked God, I said, God, this don't make any sense. I thought that you came to die for us. I thought you came knowing you was going to go to the cross, knowing that all this was going to happen. Like you wanted to do this, right? Why did you say, take this from you? It's like you don't want to do it. Why did you say that? I don't understand. And He said, in my spirit, He said, no one wants to suffer. Jesus didn't want to go to that cross. His flesh didn't want to go to that cross. He did not want to go and do the hard thing. He didn't want to go through this fire. He said, God, if there's any other way, let's do that. I don't want to do this. I don't want to go and be beaten and spat on and have my beard plucked out and a crown of thorns crammed on my head and nails in my wrist and my feet and hanging on a cross and bleeding to death and a spear coming in my side. Like, I don't want this. God, Father, if there's anything else, any other way, take this cup from me. I don't want to suffer. I don't want to do this. I don't want to go through this fire. But he said, "Yet not my will, but yours be done." If Jesus had to go to the cross, if the boys had to go in the fire, we are not exempt either. It's not about our comfort. Like I said, it's not about our comfort. God has his reasons and a plan that we cannot understand. But he is with us through it all. He has a greater purpose for us. He's in control, and we just have to give him all the worry and the fear that we have about going in the fire. That's what Jesus did when he was in the garden. He was under so much stress and anxiety over this that he was literally sweating blood. And there's a scientific name for it, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but you can Google it, where you are under so much stress and anxiety that the capillaries in your body literally burst and you sweat blood. He was sweating blood in the Garden of Gethsemane because he was under so much stress and anxiety over what he was going to have to go through, the fire that he was going to have to go through. But yet he said, "Not your will, but mine." And he trusted the Father's plan for him. He trusted God, and he went to that cross anyway. The courage it took for him to be afraid and be anxious and be scared and be nervous and tore all to pieces. He was. Even though he was God in the flesh, he was still flesh. He was man. He was fully man and fully God. And his fleshly side, his man side, did not want to go to that cross. And I don't blame him. I don't blame him. He didn't deserve it. We deserve it. He doesn't, or he didn't. He didn't want to go, but he wasn't selfish at all. He knew he was the only way, and he asked God, the Father, and he said, "Not my will, but yours. Not my will, but yours." So, verse 26 here, it says, Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace, and he shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, all them people crowded around them, and they saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies. Not a hair of their head was singed, their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. They didn't even smell like it. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." That showed Nebuchadnezzar right there that God is the one true God. Not only is the miracle of them coming out of that fire alive, nothing harmed on them, not a hair singed, they don't even smell like smoke. You couldn't even tell the evidence of them being through the fire. Not only that, but just the fact that these boys were so willing to go in the fire. They were willing to die. They were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own God. That showed him that God is the one true God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way. That just tells you how brutal of a king really King Nebuchadnezzar was. He was going to throw people in a furnace if they didn't bow down and worship his idol. He was going to cut people into pieces and have their houses turned into piles of rubble. I mean, he was a brutal king, so this wasn't a guy to mess around with. That just shows you even more so why Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego would have been so afraid to stand up for what they believed in. But they did it anyway. They had courage. They did it afraid. So then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So not only did they get out of the fire, they ended up getting a promotion. This fire had a happy ending. Happy ending. The king even believed in God after this and God's power, and he commanded everybody else to serve God, which is wonderful. He even sent out a decree for it, to tell other people to worship God and not him. And the boys were unharmed. Everything seemed to work out. It's great, wonderful, praise God, right? But in our fires and the things that we go through, even if the ending doesn't seem too happy, even if you can't see how it would be good, even if you perish in the flames, even if it hurts, even if the worst of the worst happens, even if you have to go to the cross, praise God. God is still good, and he is still faithful. And with everything that me and my family has been through in the past 2 weeks, that has been a phrase that I have said over and over and over and over again. He is still good, and he is still faithful. So that's all I have for this time, and I guess I will see you all next time.